Now.
On 105.9 FM and streaming worldwide on the WMAL app.
O'Connor and Company.
It's our big 8 o'clock hour here. 3 hours in the can. If you missed any of our live programming here on Christmas Eve, please check it out with our podcasts. Subscribe, download, all that jazz. Now, coming up in 30 days, Patrice, you're giving Mariah Carey a run for her money.
You can't play some Motown Christmas and not have me jam.
No, I understand. That's fair. You are jamming, though. We are enjoying our Christmas music this week, yes. Of all in particular as well. But I like listening to Christmas music in August, so this is like I'm in heaven right now. Coming up in 30 minutes, we're going to check in with our friend Susan Ferrechio, the Washington Times. We'll get all the behind-the-scenes action of what happened with that continuing resolution, but also whether there's going to be a leadership fight for the gavel in the House for Mike Johnson coming up in a couple of weeks. All right, that's all coming up. But first, we got some important stuff to get to here that calls for Van Halen. Donald Trump suggesting that maybe it's time the United States reassert its dominance down on that beautiful isthmus this Christmas. That the American treasure and blood that was sacrificed to make into the Panama Canal. That's right. It's an isthmus. And the Panama Canal, of course, was famously relinquished back to the control of the government of Panama. I shouldn't say back to the control. It was given to Panama. They never had control of the canal. Teddy Roosevelt, as President of the United States, directed and engineered the entire project. It was always American territory. But Jimmy Carter sold the canal for $1 back to the Panamanian government. Yes. But the treaty that was involved in that sale left open the opportunity for the American government at any time in the future to take back control of what is rightfully ours if, in fact, we feel that for economic, strategic, and military national defense purposes, the control of the canal and the operations of the canal have been compromised. Well, Donald Trump took to social media over the weekend and said specifically that the United States has a vested interest in the secure, efficient, and reliable operation of the canal, and that was always understood. We will not and will never let it fall into the wrong hands. It was not given for the benefit of others, but merely as a token of cooperation for us and Panama. If the principles, both moral and legal, of this magnanimous gesture of giving are not followed, then we will demand that the Panama Canal be returned to us in full and without question. To the officials of Panama, please be guided accordingly. Now, we'll get into the details of what's behind this in a moment, but in terms of the government of Panama, a social media account representing what's called the Open Source Zone, which is a function of the government of Panama, I believe. I'm sorry. The Open Source Zone is a media outlet on X, but they have a quote from President of Panama. The president of Panama responded and said, "Every square meter of the Panama Canal belongs to Panama, and it will continue belonging to Panama." Donald Trump replied to that on social media, saying, "We'll see about that." And soon posted a picture, a beautiful sunrise at the Panama Canal with the American flag flying, and Donald Trump simply said, "Welcome to the United States Canal." Ooh. So we'll get into a little bit of the history and about what's motivating this right now. But what do you make of this, Patrice? I mean, obviously, the economic interests of the United States are so invested in the Panama Canal. The majority of the traffic is for our economic purposes in our ports. Not to mention the military assets, for us to be able to move our battle groups, our assets, our military assets in the United States Navy from one coast to the other. We utilize that canal. It's incredibly important. And does Trump have a point here that Panama is right now flirting with China way too much and actually compromising the operations of this canal based on the latest negotiations they've had with the communist regime?
Well, interestingly, Panama moves roughly 40% of all U.S. container traffic. I mean, we're moving cars through the Panama Canal. A lot of the energy outputs that we produce in this country agricultural goods, products we're moving through. So if the idea of reclaiming the Panama Canal somehow ensures that we can move exports very quickly through, as well as at a lower cost, then I think that there is a financial a reason to maybe consider doing it. Does that mean, though, that this is would it signal a realignment in geopolitics? I think is the other issue. You already raised the impact that China is having. China's footprint around the world is expanding. You don't even need to look at Africa. It's remarkable how many African governments are being bought pretty much by China. And so the idea that if this is a way to protect the Panama Canal against Chinese influence, and frankly, to raise the costs of imports from China through the Panama Canal, I see the strategic value there.
Oh, sure.
I don't have a dog in the fight, but I absolutely see the strategic value.
I've been to the Panama Canal recently. I have seen there are two sort of points of entry right now at the Panama Canal, because new quays have been developed by the Chinese government that they have negotiated with the Panama Canal Authority that they run and operate. They're larger than the original ones. They can take larger cargo things. China utilizes their economic influence around the world for their own purposes. We know that. That's obvious. They now have very powerful economic leverage against the government of Panama. If they wanted to, they could take control of this canal, and Panama could do nothing about it. That's the economic leverage. Militarily, if it reached that point and they wanted to deploy vessels to the canal zone and they wanted to take over the entire operation militarily, they are poised to be able to do that. It cannot continue to go without American input, and America has been silent for quite some time about this. Trump mentioned this in his interview with Tucker Carlson a while back. Let's take a listen. That's cut 18.
And you take a look at the Panama Canal. It was such an incredible engineering marvel. We sold it under Jimmy Carter. We sold it to Panama for $1. The following day, they quadrupled the amount of money that ships had to pay to get across. They didn't lose one ship. And now they've made it much bigger, and now they've widened it. They've doubled it, right? They've more than doubled it. And it's one of the most profitable things. Any time it's just incredible, right? We gave it away for $1. China now controls it. They actually control the Panama Canal. They run it. They control it. And we shouldn't let that happen. And we can't let China be in Cuba.
Yeah, so now listen, in China, by the way, I've also recently been to some Caribbean islands, especially Antigua. You go to Antigua, the Chinese embassy looks like it's bigger than an operation in America. What the hell is China doing in the Caribbean? What the hell? And he is 100%. Panama will deny this and say, no, they do not. China does not control the canal. They, for all intents and purposes, do, because of the kind of economic leverage they have over that country. Ronald Reagan saw this when he was running for president, for the Republican nomination for president in 1976. He raised the concern, because Carter said he was going to do this when he ran for office. Listen to Reagan back in the day.
The Panama Canal Zone is sovereign United States territory, just as much as Alaska is, as well as the states carved from the Louisiana Purchase. We bought it, we paid for it, and General Torrijos should be told we're going to keep it.
Yeah, and of course Carter's weakness couldn't rise to that level of American strength and power, so we gave it away. Listen, again, as with everything with Trump, Patrice, this is about a deal. This is about negotiating, and he is taking the stance before he even gets sworn in that if we're not happy with Panama, if we're not happy with the way this is going, if we're not happy with China, we will take back what is rightfully ours. And make no mistake, the language of that treaty that Jimmy Carter signed with the $1 purchase, it leaves open the opportunity for America to do just that. And this is the starting point for this negotiation. Let's see what happens.
Absolutely. I just can't underscore enough. China's footprint across the globe, particularly in underdeveloped and developing countries, is massive, and it's flown under the radar. You talk about Antigua, which is the island right next to the one where I was born.
Right next to Europe.
Yeah. A lot of the African countries, you can't it is remarkable, and they bring in Chinese workers. They're not using domestic workers to support the local businesses. Everything is Chinese. They keep it, and then when they're ready to extract whatever they want from the grounds of these countries, they will leave these countries bled dry. It's crazy.
They go in, they build highways, and in the Caribbean, they're very smart. They build a cricket stadium. They build soccer stadiums. They build these things to keep people happy. It makes the government look good, and then behind the scenes, the government is basically giving China everything they want because everybody's
giving
happy
the country away, all the
until
resources.
They're not.
Yes.
All right. So Panama, shots fired. Rhetorical shots fired.
Yeah.
Do we also add to the list not just the reacquisition of what is rightfully ours, the Panama Canal, but do we add Greenland? That's right. You remember when Trump floated this idea back during his first term? He floated it again, and we'll tell you about that in a moment. First, though, it's 8:15 WMAL traffic and weather every 10 minutes. First on the five. Why not Greenland? He's a real estate guy. You know, he's a good deal. He's going to make one. All right, Patrice Onwuka. Now, personally, when it comes to my vacations, I prefer in the cold winter months going to a place like Panama or
where it's warm, where there's a beach,
Montserrat, Antigua, that sort of thing. In the summertime, Meredith, my beautiful wife, she loves going up to Alaska. We've done it a couple of times together. She loves it up there. And but here's the thing: it's a long flight. You ever try to fly to Alaska?
I have.
That is from D.C. That is a long flight.
It's a long flight. Yeah.
You can have a very similar experience flying from the East Coast if you go to, say, Iceland or Norway or even closer, Greenland. And maybe we'll have the opportunity soon because President Trump, in an announcement this weekend for his appointment of Ken Howry as the ambassador to Denmark, and he is a co-founder of PayPal. He's a venture capitalist. He's, your typical guy who would end up being an ambassador. But Denmark, who cares, right? There's something fishy in Denmark. Great Danes come from Denmark. Hamlet, right? But other than that, who cares? Well, Denmark, the kingdom of Denmark, happens to be the sovereign ownership, I guess, for lack of a better word, of Greenland. And buried in this announcement is this line: the United States of America feels that the ownership and control of Greenland is an absolute necessity for national security and freedom throughout the world. And he left it at that. And Snarva was like, wait a minute, are we going to acquire Greenland? And theoretically we could. If he negotiated a deal, we would, in exchange for money. And that's how we got Alaska, by the way. Is there a strategic reason why we would want Greenland?
Well, apparently we have a U.S. air base there. The Put-e-Kufik. I absolutely butchered it. But an air base that's strategically important for the U.S. military and its ballistic missile early warning system. So if we want to have a presence there where we can absolutely know whenever there's some sort of missile attack has been launched from Europe, that is the place to have a foothold. We have one there, but to actually have control over the sovereign nation, I mean, and hey, the tourism aspect would probably be a side addition.
It would,
but I absolutely think it's strategically 100% about our military presence and ensuring that if in case there is a World War III, which we're probably on the verge of, we have positioning that protects us as our homeland.
Geographically, it makes more sense that Greenland would be part of Canada than any other nation. Denmark, it's bizarre that it's actually part of Denmark.
Yeah, but can Canada afford? Canada can't afford it.
Not at all. Not in any way whatsoever. And of course, people have made note of the uncomfortable reality that no one has said that Greenland is for sale. But that doesn't matter. Everything's for sale if you can make a deal.
The Danish Prime Minister did say, Larry, sorry to cut you off, but he'd call this, quote, absurd. And he's dismissing it as just a nasty idea. So we'll see.
Oh, yeah, that's let's see what happens when you get to the table and you see what the price tag is.
Yeah.
People that I rely on for good military and strategic advice tell me that actually, if you take Democrats and the national security apparatus in this town at their word, and that Vladimir Putin and Russia pose the greatest single threat to world peace right now, then you cannot ignore how important Greenland would be in that scenario. Wow. Not just in terms of its geographic proximity east to west between the United States and Europe, but also the fact that it is so close to the polar ice cap, the northern part of Greenland. This is an important place where ships and submarines are traversing on Russia's behalf, where they're trying to take over that area up there. Also for missile launching, because of the curvature of the Earth, it makes us accessible to Asia very easily if you go over the top, as it were, versus going east to west. Greenland is incredibly strategic. And frankly, if you truly do believe in America's manifest destiny, which I do, it does kind of make sense. I just like the idea of it's like no one's ever talking about Greenland, and Trump gets into office and he's like, yeah, Greenland. It's like, okay, let's all talk about Greenland.
I have never heard the term manifest destiny used beyond just our coast. I mean, I never thought about expanding beyond just the East and the Pacific and the Atlantic, going all the way.
Well, I mean, we got Alaska. I mean, here's the thing. Not only is it important strategically, but it allows us another foothold to keep an eye on those Canadians, which I don't know about you, but I'm still very suspicious of them.
You think Justin Trudeau would sell us out?
Hasn't he?
To China?
He's sold out the people of Canada. Of course he would sell us out. Also, by the way, if you're really interested, Greenland is critical for climate change research facilities. And, we shouldn't trust any other nation for that if that's something that you're interested in. And something tells me Greenland has oil, just like Alaska had oil. So let's see what happens. Either way, I think it's a fascinating conversation. From Panama to Greenland, we are flexing our muscles globally. And hey, what could go wrong? It's 8:23.
It's 8:25 WMAL. Traffic and weather every 10 minutes, first on the fives. Is there any traffic, Jamie Whitten, in the Hadid Carpet Cleaning Traffic Center?
Very little traffic, and I'm so happy to share that good news because you really deserve it. You sat in enough traffic all year long.
Coming up, we've got Susan Ferrechio for the Washington Times. She's going to break down all of the drama behind the spending bill that was passed, the stopgap bill, everything that went on behind the scenes. Stay with us. It's O'Connor & Company at 8:30.
It's 8:37 on O'Connor & Company this Christmas week. We love being live and local for you on days like this. Absolutely.
And by the way, retired military Tim Miller, we are not hitting the eggnog. This is just the joy of the season.
What is that? So on social media, they're asking if we're drunk. They're asking it. Just because we're excited about Greenland.
And listen, he's a good fan. He always messages us at Larry O'Connor, at Patrice Pink File. But he says, "Are you two hitting the eggnog?" I mean, we're very giddy today. It's because we're excited for the holiday season.
Let's be very, very clear. We keep very high standards here on this program, and neither Patrice nor I will never, ever drink any kind of alcoholic beverage during the show. Julie Gunlock, on the other hand.
We can't speak for Julie.
Frankly, she's better when she's tipsy.
No, I know Julie. She would not do that either. Joining
us right now is another absolutely perfectly functioning alcoholic. She is Susan Ferrechio, national politics correspondent for the Washington Times. If you had to deal with Congress on a daily basis, you'd be dipping into the bourbon now and again. Merry Christmas, Susan. Thanks for joining us.
Oh, Merry Christmas, you guys. Yes, in the press galleries, you can always find a spare bottle of bourbon somewhere.
That's why they like Nancy Pelosi so much. I said that, not you. Susan, lots have been I want to talk about the leadership fight, if there is going to be one in the House, in a moment. But just looking in the rearview mirror here, it looks like Chip Roy and the 35 Republicans who really didn't want any increase in the debt ceiling or any discussion, they just wanted, to really make a big deal. They're not happy with what ended up happening on Friday. But they're the only ones. And I got to ask you, because Trump seems happy, Johnson seems happy, the Democrats agreed to something that was drastically different than the 1,500-page omnibus, really, that was disguised as a continuing resolution. Who blinked here? Because it sure seems like the Republicans, Trump and Johnson, ended up with a much better package than what Schumer and Jeffries wanted.
Oh, yes, I have an answer for you. It's a very, very easy answer. It's a one-word answer. Everybody. And that's because it is the answer. And that's because this thing is always brinksmanship, as you just pointed out. Yeah. And oftentimes, everybody has something to lose. And it's a matter of who loses more. And in this situation, there was just too much possible loss all the way around, so they accepted something that looked like not everyone was losing too much. And that's what you got here. Now, if you want to say, well, if Trump and Elon Musk, et cetera, hadn't weighed in on this, then the 1,500-page bill with all the woke language may have gotten through with Democrats, and it would have been just another situation where Democrats got their way on the spending bill. And so, in that sense, they did accomplish a lot. They shed, 1,200 plus pages of this bill went, into the trash can, right? With all the stuff we were talking about, including the sneaky pay raises for lawmakers, and some other language in there that was really kind of startling that it was allowed there in the first place. So on the surface, you see that. You're like, well, hey, mission accomplished. Trump managed to have an imprint. He's not even president yet. Mm-hmm. But it's not really what it seems, because I think what the president-elect really wanted for his purposes was to get rid of this fight next year in the debt ceiling. Mm-hmm. He didn't get his way on that. So that's now hanging over their heads for next year. That's bad, because it's like if they want to do their tax reform bill and all the rest of their agenda, this thing's going to get in the way. It's like playing, if you're going to use a sports terminology, it's like playing 2 Super Bowls at once. They can't do that. They need the time, the space, they need the political oxygen open for their tax or border security, their big agenda that they're trying to get through. Right. So this is really going to muck up the works for them next year. And now for the other gang that you talked about, the spending hawks, Chip Roy, et cetera, those guys, they didn't vote for the bill because it didn't have any of the spending reforms that they wanted in there, and it adds to the debt and the deficit, something they've been complaining about for a really long time. So that's the lay of the land for that legislation. Okay. It's done. It's out the door. So go ahead.
So Susan, picking up with the deficit hawks, what's going to be their play when it comes time for the speaker's vote? Because obviously, I've seen some headlines that Republicans are saying Speaker Johnson could have had this done sooner, or it was too much unnecessary drama. Why not have started with this kind of clean CR earlier? So what's the is there a general feeling that his speakership is going to be a challenge for him to be to keep that title?
So the Congress reopens again in approximately 10 days. Yeah. I don't know if the House is going to be functioning, and I say that with usually you can speculate what's going to happen with the speaker's vote. Look what happened with McCarthy last time, Kevin McCarthy. It took 5 days or so for them to actually get the votes together for him. We could be looking at a similar scenario this time. And I don't know where Trump is going to fall on this. He's generally supported Johnson. We know that. They make public appearances together. He's vocally supportive of him. But I don't know if that is shifting a little bit because of what just happened with the spending bill. For the president is not happy with the fact that the debt ceiling limit was not taken care of in there, and that it wasn't taken care of before. This all wasn't negotiated in. They're questioning his leadership. The problem with that is, if the House doesn't open, you're going to have these days of a non-functioning House where Trump can't get his agenda passed, and I dare say they won't be able to hold the confirmation of the Electoral College on the 6th. I mean, they need to be in. If the speaker's not in, they can't do anything. All they can do is every time they gavel in, they just have to keep having that vote on the speaker. Right. They do nothing. So the House is dark. They can't just function with a interim speaker. Democrats aren't going to allow that. So you're looking at a potential mess like the one we saw in 2022. The difference being 2023 rather. The difference being they really need to be in because they have limited time to move the president's agenda. They've got this one precious year before politics interfere. Never mind the fact that, I've never experienced this before, but what would happen if the House could not, validate the Electoral College on the 6th because the House is not in session because they don't have a speaker? I mean, you're looking at some real ugly situations that could play out here if Johnson doesn't have support. Already, I know there's at least one lawmaker, Tom Massey of Kentucky, who said that he is not going to support Johnson, and you've got a few others that are wavering. That could there's got to be a phone calls happening right now, and between now and January 3rd, I would think, to try to make sure that Johnson has the support he needs, or else you're gonna just have basically lights out in the House.
All right, hold
at a critical time.
Hold that thought, because there's some weird stuff going on here, and that would be unprecedented. That would be odd. Also, the fact that a congresswoman for the last 6 months has been missing, Kay Granger, and it's now been discovered has been living in a dementia care facility. It's just unprecedented, as you just said, Susan. So can you stay with us for one more segment to talk about that stuff as well? All right, more with Susan Ferrechio in a moment. It's 8:44. All right, we want to get to this missing congresswoman from Texas and that
Yes.
bizarre story.
Oh, my
but
goodness.
first, we are joined by Susan Ferrechio of the Washington Times, because there's another missing congressman that is incredibly critical in the conversation we were just having in terms of what happens the first week. And that's the congressman, Susan, who actually wants to be Speaker of the House other than Mike Johnson. Because I understand Tom Massey, who seems to be a really credible and earnest guy with regard to spending and deficit and debt. And I mean, listen, he literally wears the freaking debt clock on his lapel, famously. So I get that. But you can get rid of, as we have learned in the past, Susan, you can get rid of the Speaker. But if no one is willing or able to get the votes in this majority to be the next Speaker, what the hell are you doing? So is there anyone even quietly behind the scenes trying to rally the conference to vote for him for Speaker or her?
No, and I think what you would see in this instance is the same lineup as last time, where the top leaders try to run to fill the position. You might see Jim Jordan, the conservative chairman of the Judiciary Committee. He might go for it again. I'm just throwing names out there saying who you might see.
But no one's on the record right now saying I'll do it.
No.
And until
They're
that
all
happens,
backing Johnson.
until that happens, and Trump has been, Trump has not said anything negative about Johnson, as far as I know, unless you've seen it. So until one of those two things happens, somebody steps up and says, I'm going to challenge Johnson personally, or number two, Trump actually publicly undermines Johnson, Johnson's the Speaker, as far as I can see.
Well, it's not quite that simple. So what will happen is the Congress will come in on the 3rd, and the first thing they'll do after they have a quorum call is they'll have the vote for Speaker. And then whether or not there's a backup plan, we'll just see if he has the votes.
Okay.
The lawmakers who don't like him aren't going to base their vote on whether they have a backup plan. How do we know this? Because when they tell us that, they just say, well, this is what we think. We'll have to all reconvene and come up with another solution. I know there were people floating names on Capitol Hill out of frustration last week before the 1,500-page spending bill was trashed. There were people, floating names. They were so angry at Johnson for negotiating the deal. But you're right. They would have to come up with somebody quickly. Would they coalesce in a faster way than they did last time to try to avoid, keeping the House, pretty much in the dark for weeks? I think they might try to do that, try to come up with something more quickly. But whoever they come up with has the same problem. And the same problem is that it's not just that they have a slim majority. They could get everybody together. I've seen Congresses do that before, both parties. But they have to deal with the Senate, and the Senate doesn't have the 60 votes. So they're always going to have Democrats watering stuff down. That's just going to be part of, for the vast majority of legislation, that's what's going to happen. And they have to kind of live with that.
Yeah.
So there's that issue, too. And,
it's
a real, I think you're going to see Trump angry at that group, at the group of, he was threatening to primary Chip Roy, for example.
Yes,
so,
I saw.
He's all over the map on it.
Right.
Trump does not want his agenda upended. Let's just put it that way.
We're up against it, but we appreciate you. Merry Christmas to you and your great
Susan.
family. Love you guys. We'll see you soon.
Oh, thank you so much. Okay.
8:53.
WMAL-FM Woodbridge, Washington, a Cumulus media station.
Making sense of the news.
News Talk 105.9.